Hello and welcome to the Crystal Palace podcast. I'm Alfonso Greenbrook, and in today's podcast I'll be looking over the game against Fulham but bring you my match review, player rankings and my man of the match. As well as this, I'm also going to bring you interviews with Roy Hodgson, Jeffrey Schlupp, Michy Batshuayi and Christian Benteke after the game. So let's begin. Palace secured a big win in their quest to survive in the Premier League as goals from Luka Milivojevic and Jeffrey Schlupp saw the Eagles beat struggling Fulham. A first half penalty from the host skipper put his team in front and control of proceedings, and after peppering Fulham's goal in the second half, eventually the lead was doubled 2 minutes from time when Jeffrey Schlupp tapped home after good work from debutant Michy Batshuayi. The Cottagers came into the game buoyed by their 4-2 win over Brighton in midweek, with Alexander Mitrovic netting twice, and he should have got on the score sheet for the third time this week on 9 minutes, when a great cross by Joe Bryan was perfectly placed for him to nod past Vicente Gaeta, but somehow the Serbian put what looked to be the best chance of the game wide. But on 24 minutes, for the second home game in succession, Palace were handed the opportunity to take the lead via an unusual handball incident. Under pressure from Christian Benteke, Cyrus Christie inexplicably nudged the ball away from the Belgian with his flailing hand, and once again Milivojevic dispatched a penalty despite Sergio Rico coming close to stopping his powerful attempt. In a half of few chances, 10 minutes later the Woodward denied the Eagles from doubling their lead in brilliant fashion when Andros Townsend stood up across towards the back post and Benteke acrobatically smashed a bicycle kick off the crossbar. But apart from another Mitrovic header that fell to Vicente Gaeta, the opening 45 minutes came to its conclusion with little action of note. Once play resumed, Palace continued to look the more likely to grab the all-important second goal, and Jordan Ayew forced Rico to tip the ball over after breaking into the box, before James Tompkins saw a free header from a Milivojevic corner float into the homestay just after the hour mark. That was soon followed up by Jeffrey Schlupp forcing Rico to save with his legs, before the Ghanaian saw similar effort deflected wide by Max Meyer, and then Michy screwed a header wide. But as the missed chances kept piling up, the visitors were still in the game, and their main threat Mitrovic saw a shot on the turn fly over with 15 minutes remaining. With 8 minutes to go, Batshuayi came on for his Eagles debut and received a warm welcome from the Palace faithful, and he soon played a big part in securing a win for Palace by helping them get the second goal that Hodgson's team deserved. After picking up the ball from Townsend in the box, some quick feet allowed him to wriggle away from the Fulham defence and a thunderous shot was palmed away by Rico, but Schlupp was the first to react to the loose ball and tapped home his fourth of the season to seal the points. Batshuayi nearly put the icing on proceedings, but his drive from distance was caught by Rico, and one last attempt by Callum Chambers fails to force Gaeta into his first save of the day, as Palace cruised to a league double over their opponents and moved further away from the relegation zone. So I'm now going to move on to the player ratings, but before I start, don't forget you can follow us on both Twitter and Facebook at Crystal Palace for all the latest Palace news. So if you are someone like myself who does like to follow a vast array of Palace accounts on both Twitter and Facebook, then do head over there and of course follow our own page at Crystal Palace, because it is a great place to get all the latest Palace news. Now, of course, the transfer window has already shut, but throughout the whole of January, we obviously were sourcing and posting all the latest news articles, whether that be transfers going in or out. So if you do want another Palace account to follow where, of course, you can get all the latest news, especially transfer news during the 2 transfer windows, then of course feel free to do so. And of course, alongside just general news about the club, we obviously post interviews, whether that be with players, the management, owners, whatever it is, we obviously regularly do post these. And of course, alongside that, we do obviously post just general news about the club. So whether that be about the academy, whether that be about the ladies team, whether that even be about the stadium, we obviously do keep you up to date with that. And alongside the podcast, there is someone who runs the page on Twitter, and of course before and after the game they post their own opinion on there. So rather than just listening to me and waiting for the podcast, if you do head over there as well, just for another opinion, then of course the guys are there, or the guys there who obviously run the page, you can of course get a feel for their opinions as well. So if you are someone who wants another Palace account to follow for all of these different things, whether that be news, interviews, or obviously our own opinions, then of course feel free to do so. And of course you can find these pages at @eCrystalPalace on both Twitter and Facebook. Now, another great place to share your opinion is in your YouTube comments, so if you are listening to the podcast on YouTube, then do feel free to drop a comment below the video with your player ratings where you rate the players' performances from 1 to 10, and of course that's with 10 being the best. Now, one of the main reasons for you to do that is just so that I can come back to the video, and rather than me just having my general view of the game, I can read the comment section and see how you guys thought the players performed, but also any other fans, whether they be Fulham or Palace fans who come to the video, rather than them just listening to my view in the podcast and basically how I reviewed and how I thought the players performed, they can obviously have a look in the comments section and just have a general feel for how obviously I thought the players performed by listening to the podcast, but also read the comment section so they can just have a feel for how, you know, other people feel. Now, personally for myself, I do like to, you know, a lot of the time, especially after games, right after the game, go onto Twitter and basically see what other people thought and see how their opinion of the game compared to mine. So essentially, I just want to have that same sort of discussion here on YouTube. So if you do want to, you know, share your player ratings so I can compare how I thought the players performed to how you thought they performed, or even if you just want to comment below with your general views of the game, you know, whether you're a Fulham or Palace fan, you know, what you thought about the game, what you thought about the penalty, what you thought about the goals we scored, whether you think Michy Batshuayi will be a success for us, whatever it is, alongside player ratings, then of course do feel free to comment them below, because of course I'm always up for discussions. And if there is anything else that I say in the podcast that you may, you know, disagree with, then of course also feel free to question me, drop your comments below, drop your questions below as well, because of course I like to have questions, and of course I'm always open to answering any of your questions. So of course if you do want to get involved, whether that be on Twitter or YouTube, then of course do go via the appropriate routes. So if you do want to follow any of the social media pages that I've already mentioned, or join the Facebook group, then do check all links that will be in the description below. But I'm now going to move on to my player ratings, starting to go with Vicente Gaeta, who I'm going to give a 6 overall. Now, in terms of Gaeta's performance here, you know, I might as well go back, you know, to midweek where he played against Southampton. And actually, I was talking about he's just come back from injury, and it was sort of 50-50 as to whether he was going to play, in the fact that both Hennessy and Gaeta were back. So, of course, there was a debate there. But in terms of his performance, there was obviously a debate as to whether he would be back to his normal standard in terms of before he got injured, or whether you'll see in his play that he was a little bit injured. Now, the good thing about that game is he didn't look like he was injured, and he put in a very good shift. And actually, the game here against Fulham, once again, didn't look like he's just come back from an injury, so that's good, the fact that he's got himself back to how he was before the injury. But the thing that was also quite impressive in the fact that is that even though he wasn't really tested, when he was called upon, he was still able to make the saves. And I said that quite a few times looking over the Southampton game, in the fact that yes, he wasn't really tested by Southampton for the majority of the game, but when called upon, he was able to make the saves. And I suppose, much like that game in midweek, the game against Fulham at the weekend was much the same. Now, in terms of the first 45 minutes of the first half, he was literally a spectator for that half. You know, Fulham didn't really test us, and the few chances they did get going forward, it was literally balls into the box, Mitrovic to head, and obviously one of them went wide and one of them went over. So you look at them two chances in particular from Fulham's best player, and aside from that, there wasn't really anything obviously that Gaeta had to do, but in terms of chances from the opposition, there wasn't really anything there. Now, in terms of one of Mitrovic's chances, you could argue that if Mitrovic had got it on target, then maybe he would have scored it. So rather than it being on Gaeta, you know, being in the right position, he wasn't in the right position, quite frankly. So if Mitrovic had actually, you know, put a bit more accuracy into that header, they could have opened the scoring. So I suppose, even though Gaeta wasn't really tested for the half, if, you know, the Fulham attacker or the Fulham striker in Mitrovic had been a little bit more clinical, then maybe they would have, you know, at least had a few more chances on goal. But luckily for us, they didn't. So obviously that header, which obviously went wide of the post, Gaeta was literally rooted to the spot, didn't really move. So arguably, if Mitrovic had got it on target, then maybe he would have scored from that, because Gaeta didn't seem to move there. But once again, we can't really say that he wouldn't have moved because we didn't see that scenario. So maybe if it you know, Mitrovic had got a clean you know, touch on it, then maybe Gaeta would have moved for it. But I suppose if you had to pick out one thing from his game, it's the fact that yes, it didn't go in and it went wide, but maybe it would have been better just to see a little bit more movement from Gaeta, which of course we've seen in the past, but obviously on this occasion here in that scenario, he didn't quite do it. Now, one of the things I did like about his performance, and once again, when you consider the injury he got a few weeks ago, or almost a month ago, is the fact that he went to claim a cross, felt awkwardly, and obviously hurt his thigh, I believe it was. So of course, in this game here, even though he's just come back from that injury, it was so nice to see him actually jumping up, trying to claim crosses, and essentially by doing that, he was obviously giving that, or relieving pressure from the defenders. So obviously that confidence that he brings to the side with just how good he is in goal, obviously, but also just that presence he's got in terms of being physical, making his height known by actually coming out to crosses and sort of commanding and demanding his area. That was of course good to see. So the fact that he done that so well obviously put pressure off the defenders and allowed people like Saka and Tompkins just to go about their job to deal with Mitrovic. But when you consider the few chances that Fulham did have through on goal, the fact that Gaeta was there to claim the crosses or to, catch the ball or fall on the ball, the fact that he was there just to do what you would normally expect from a goalkeeper, that was of course good to see. But overall, I can't really give him anything higher than a 6, because essentially for the first half he was a spectator, and then in the second half, other than a few crosses and a few balls that he obviously saved, there wasn't really much of note, and he didn't really have much to do. So that's what you want from a player. If they're not going to play great or they're not going to be tested, you just want them to do their job when called upon, and that's exactly what we got from Gaeta. So I do think a 6 overall is a fair result. So I'm going to move on now to the first player in our defence, and that is the right back Aaron Wan-Bissaka, who I'm going to give a 7 overall. Now, in terms of Wan-Bissaka's performance, last sort of few weeks or so, I've gone on and talked about who he was up against individually, because I do think as a sort of a one-on-one defender, Wan-Bissaka is going to be one of the best in the league. If you look at his tackling stats, he's exactly that. So when he was coming up against Ryan Babel, even though Ryan Babel, he's just been transferred in, he obviously hasn't been in the Premier League for a few years, he's been one of Fulham's best players in recent weeks. So of course, him up against Aaron Wan-Bissaka was going to be a good battle, and certainly Wan-Bissaka, who obviously has the inexperience, even though he plays like an experienced player, he has that inexperience, and of course he's up against the experience of Ryan Babel. So actually that was quite a good battle in the game, and arguably I think looking back at Wan-Bissaka's performance, I can't really think of a point in the game where he put a foot wrong. He barely put a foot wrong in the game, and obviously it was mainly because of how well he was dealing with Ryan Babel. But when you consider most of Fulham's attacks came down that left hand side, Wan-Bissaka was actually under quite a lot of pressure, and the fact that he overcome that by just performing like he normally does, up in his game at certain points, continuing to, make very important tackles and challenges. So the fact that even though he had someone in Ryan Babel to deal with individually, and then obviously, other players around him because they were attacking down the left, the fact that Wan-Bissaka just stood up, made himself counted, and basically took it in his stride to defend against a mass of players was of course good to see. But like I've said already, the fact that he stuck to his task well, basically didn't try and do anything spectacular, just stay to the basics, make a challenge, make a tackle, or just put yourself in a way to block, crosses and things like that. So the fact that he stuck to the basics really allowed him to not necessarily take advantage of the Fulham attack, but considering he was outnumbered, that obviously by sticking to them defensive principles allowed him to obviously deal with the mass of Fulham players around him. Now, the other thing I picked out about his performance, and obviously I could talk all day about his tackling and his sliding tackle ability, getting the ball off opposition. I could talk all day about all the parts of his game, and especially sort of interceptions as well. But the thing that I was most impressed with his performance against Fulham at the weekend, and that's the reason I've given him a 7, is just the fact that quite a lot of the game, rather than playing out wide, or playing quite wide like he normally does, he actually was playing quite narrow at times, and that was to help out James Tompkins. And obviously I say Tompkins in particular because he was obviously playing on that side of the pitch, but you could say as a back four, I think they did well to help each other and complement each other. But Wan-Bissaka and Tompkins in particular, I do think Wan-Bissaka done a great job in terms of tucking inside, being a bit more narrow, just to give that extra layer of support to the back four. And basically the main reason for that was just to help with the threat of Mitrovic. So I talked about the fact that Gaeta didn't really have much to do other than a few chances that Mitrovic had. But then if you look at it again, the reason why Gaeta didn't have too much to do in goal is just because of the back four in front of him was so good. And certainly Wan-Bissaka, in terms of helping Tompkins, was one of the main reasons why Fulham were limited with their chances. Because if you've got someone like Wan-Bissaka who's coming in and helping another one of your best players in terms of dealing with the opposition's best player, of course you're going to limit their chances, and of course you're going to limit the chances of the team. So the fact that Wan-Bissaka not only done his own work as a right back really well in terms of dealing with Ryan Babel, dealing with that overlap that Fulham were playing down at left hand side, but also he was able to tuck inside and actually deal with Mitrovic as well. And I've talked already about the fact that he's inexperienced, but he never plays like an inexperienced player. And one of the things I liked about this performance in particular is just his game management. Now, of course, game management for Roy Hodgson is something that's come up recently and something which I've talked about quite a lot. But in terms of Wan-Bissaka, the fact that he's able to manage his game right by knowing when to be in the right position, and I suppose it's just the general sort of game awareness in the fact that he knows when to go forward, he knows when to go back, he knows when to drift inside, and he knows well, the fact that he's got, in this game in particular, 7 attempted tackles, 7 successful tackles. So the fact that he's got a 100% success rate in tackles really just goes to show how well he's timing everything of his game. So the fact that he was able to deal with Ryan Babel, deal with the overlap, as well as tucking inside, really just shows a vast array of his skills, and the fact that he's able to deal with one-on-ones, deal with being outnumbered, as well as just dealing with tucking inside. So the fact that all parts of his defensive work were absolutely outstanding against Fulham was of course good to see. And I suppose the only downside of his performance, and obviously for me personally the reason I couldn't give him an 8 for his performance, is just the fact that he got booked quite late, a tackle on Joe Bryan. But you know, you look back at the game and the commentators are going, here's, you know, Wan-Bissaka, he's not missed a tackle all game, and then he goes and gives a foul away, which is obviously the commentator's curse. So the fact that he went almost the whole game by making fantastic tackles and then one towards the end was obviously a little bit late. I don't think, looking at the stats, I don't think that counts as part of the 100% successful tackles, because I do think this was I think it's classed as a foul as opposed to an attempted tackle. But whichever way you look at it, and obviously the stats are a bit confusing, but whichever way you look at it, besides that one little challenge on Joe Bryan, he was absolutely outstanding, in particular with his sliding tackles. So of course Wan-Bissaka here, like he does week in week out, didn't really fail to impress me once again, and put in yet another sterling performance. And you know, you look back after the game, you know, I think it was the next day on Sunday, loads of news articles coming out about Manchester City looking at Wan-Bissaka and looking at Chilwell, I think as well, from Leicester, in terms of being their replacements for the ageing fullbacks that Manchester City had. Now that's obviously a bit worrying in the fact that, you know, we could lose him if a potential massive bid comes in for him. But then at the end of the day, most big teams, you know, you look at your Manchester United, Manchester Cities, Tottenham, Chelsea, they're all going to be scouting and are all going to be interested in young talent in the Premier League, and certainly, you know, in English football. So of course it's worrying in the fact that we could potentially see a massive bid for him in the summer. But then on the other hand, because all of the big teams are always looking at the best players in the league, it's quite inevitable that you're going to be linked with him. But you know, whilst we've got Aaron Wan-Bissaka, you know, being one of our best players and certainly one of arguably our best defender, you know, performing like he did here, well, but essentially performing like he does in week out, was of course good to see. So of course, make of it what you want of the news articles. But like I said already, another sterling performance from Aaron Wan-Bissaka, and certainly does deserve the 7 I've given him. And obviously do feel free to comment below with your thoughts about that transfer rumour, and what you think, or how much you, I suppose, whether you do think City will actually come in for him in the summer, and if they do, potentially how much should we rate him at? Because understandably, like we've done with Wolf, we should stand firm and say we don't want to sell our best player. But if a massive bid does, what would it take for the club in terms of, is it going to be 50 million, 60 million? How much is it going to take in terms of a price tag to obviously get him away from Palace? But once again, I'll leave that for you guys to discuss. But Aaron Wan-Bissaka here, the right back, I'm going to give him a 7 overall. So now I'm going to move on to the first of our 2 centre-backs, and that is James Tompkins, who I'm going to give a 7 overall. Now in terms of the defence, and I suppose as a whole the back 4, I could obviously repeat quite a lot of the stuff in the fact that we kept a clean sheet and we were fairly solid at the back. But in terms of Tompkins' performance, and the reason I've given him a 7, is just because on the whole I think he defended relatively well. And obviously when you consider, you know, we had a clash of heads, you know, into that second half, obviously had to go off the pitch, had loads of, you know, cotton wool buds and whatever, so to obviously stop the bleeding. So of course you can understand him, even though he was playing well, obviously he had that knock in the second half, but the fact that he still came back onto the pitch and continued to play well, continued to head balls despite having that head injury, which don't yet, but it looked to be a broken nose, you know, watching it live. But obviously, nevertheless, the fact that he was just a warrior in the fact that he just overcome that and continued to play despite that, despite all of the blood coming out, was of course good to see. And in terms of, you know, looking back at the replays, quite a nasty bash, you know, not intent, you know, it was an accident, no real intent in that, but of course he's obviously had, or gonna have, quite a nasty on that. But in terms of the only downside of Tompkins' performance, because I do think on the whole he defended really well, and that was early on into the game, just a little bit of a lapse in concentration, about the 11th minute or so. Obviously a ball's come into the area, he slightly misjudged it, and of course Mitrovic had a free header on goal, and that's the one I talked about where Gaeta was a bit standing still, didn't necessarily die for it, and of course, unluckily, or luckily for us, Mitrovic obviously failed to hit the target, but nevertheless, I suppose we rarely see this from James Tompkins, in the fact that he switches off and he lets a ball like that go into the box and he misjudged it. But, you know, like I've said already, it didn't really punish us, but on another day, if there was a little bit more of a clinical striker there, you know, if we'd had someone like an Eden Hazard or a Sergio Aguero, who of course scored a hat-trick at the weekend, If we had someone like that, then maybe they would have finished that chance. But, you know, quite fortunately for us, he obviously failed to hit the target. But aside from that little lapse of concentration, I didn't really see any mistakes from Tompkins in the rest of the game. And the fact that he recovered well from it, you know, he didn't let that little mistake early on, albeit we weren't punished, but he didn't let that mistake get to him, and he just continued to play like he always does. So the fact that he's got that determination, he's got that grit to overcome stuff that happens to you is of course good to see. And I suppose the only reason why I wouldn't give him an 8, because I do think his performance does deserve it, is purely based on the fact that quite early on in the game, a little bit of a lapse in concentration, which of course could have cost us. You know, at that point would have been 1-0 to Fulham and could have changed the whole complexion of the game. So, you know, the fact that he made that mistake isn't great, but it's something we rarely see from him. The fact that the fact that it's surprising when he makes a mistake really just goes to show how good and how consistent he is for us. Now, obviously, like I've said already, in terms of the injury he got in the second half, he's obviously in the box. There's loads of players around it. Obviously, Fulham defending quite deep. Tompkins has gone up to try and get the ball. So have, I think it's 2 or 3 Fulham players. Obviously, just nudged him in the head. Not intentional, fully a mistake, but nevertheless, obviously Tompkins had to go off for a while. And the reason why Fulham were defending so deep is just because previous corners, and you've seen recently in terms of Sacco getting chances from corners, obviously they were leaving players unmarked. So in this occasion, they've packed players into the box, Fulham. Obviously, as they've all gone up to try and attack the ball, because obviously Tompkins otherwise would have got there, obviously they've clashed heads. So not really anything malicious there, but nevertheless an injury. And obviously it was a clash of heads which obviously left him with that bloody nose. But like I've said already, you know, the fact that he had that warrior attitude just to carry on, come back on the pitch. And even though he had the injury, I thought he wouldn't head a ball for the rest of the game. But then a few moments later, he goes and hits the ball, which really just goes to show that grit and determination he's got. And obviously, just I suppose just that the word I used recently to describe defenders is just a rock, and that's essentially what it is. Because despite having that injury, he stood strong and still made headers despite the injury. So obviously, for the fact that he defended well for the most part, apart from that chance early on in the game, and combine that with the fact that just overall defensively he was very solid, and the fact that he had just that determination just to carry on despite that injury was of course good to see. And you know, when you consider at one point I think they brought the stretcher on, or they were looking like they were going to do it, it did look to be a little bit serious. But nevertheless, like I've said already, the fact that he came on, played out the rest of the game, had made his contribution count for us getting a clean sheet was of course good to see. And you know, look back at our stats for this season, we're now 5th in the league in terms of clean sheets, which just once again goes to show how good the defence has been playing, but in particular the back two of Tompkins and Sacco, how well they've been playing this season. So once again, another solid performance from James Tompkins, and you know, hopefully he recovers from that injury for the game coming up. So I'm going to move on now to our second centre back, and that is Mamadou Sakho, who I am going to give an 8 overall. Now, in terms of his performance here, you know, I could talk much more the same, you know, like I've been talking about Tompkins, in the fact that defensively he was very solid, made it very difficult for Fulham, and in particular Milivojevic, he obviously done a sterling job in terms of restricting his chances, and in terms of man marking, essentially marked him out of the game, as opposed to, or I suppose other than the 2 or 3 headers that obviously Milivojevic had. Now, in terms of his performance here, I've given him an 8 because I was really impressed with him, and the fact that everything that Fulham threw at him, he was able to deal with it, was of course great. But actually, when you consider he was actually involved in our second goal, albeit he won't get an assist, or he probably won't get much in terms of from pundits or in terms of stats, but he was the guy who was the real architect of our second goal. So literally, I think it was like the 88th minute or something like that, really late in the game. Obviously there's no reason for him to panic in terms of defending, but what he's done, Fulham were going to hit on the break, makes the first challenge, the ball gets away from him, makes the second challenge to hoof the ball forward, and of course Andrew Townsend, Max Meyer, Michy Batshuayi obviously are involved in that move, which of course eventually sees Jeffrey Schlupp scored. So not only was Sakho doing his defensive job really well by just being that rock at the back, but actually in terms of winning the ball back and actually driving forward, he was absolutely outstanding. Now, of course, he didn't do that throughout the whole game. Quite a lot of the game, he was just passing the ball quite nicely around the back, just trying to get a little bit more possession in the game. But when it did matter, at that point, you know, we're 1-0 up, try and get that final goal just to kill the game off. He did exactly that. You know, Fulham were quite easily, they've got the pace on the counter-attack. They could have easily hit us there. But once again, Sakho, you know, run into the Fulham area, made the first challenge, the ball's got away, made the second challenge, which of course therefore hoofed the ball forward. So the fact that he combined his defensive work in terms of how good he was and how much of a rock he was at the back, and the fact that he stopped everything that Fulham threw at him, and the fact that he combined that with that ability to not only just win the challenges, because it would have been fine for him to win Sorry, it would have been fine for him to actually win the challenge and, you know, the ball goes out for something. But the fact that he won it twice, and the fact that when he won it the second time he actually got the ball forward, was the thing that of course really did impress me. Now, something which really could have capped up his performance, which of course was a solid performance from him, but what could have capped it off and probably would have been deserving of a 9, is just the fact that there was a header he had free in the box when he was well placed, the ball came into the area, well placed, and obviously he put the header wide. So obviously I'm not really going to talk too much about that because we scored 2 goals, we won the game, and the fact that you're not going to expect Milivojevic to be one of the best headers of the ball, but nevertheless had a great chance to, you know, get a goal for Palace. Obviously he couldn't finish it, but arguably that's not really going to affect his performance, and the reason it didn't really affect the reason I've given him an 8, mainly just because of how good he was just defensively on the whole, and obviously his contribution he had for the goal. So obviously do comment below with your general views, you know, whether you think, what you think of our defensive partnership. Is it the best defensive partnership outside of the top 6? Obviously I'll leave that for you guys to debate, but personally for me, I wouldn't make bold statements like that because of course, you know, the likes of West Ham and Leicester have got solid centre backs, but I do certainly think that, and the stats are there to back it up, that actually we've got a formidable force at the back, and hopefully, you know, in games going forward they can continue to play like they're doing, because obviously they're going to be quite crucial for us going forward. So once again, Milivojevic here, going to give him an 8 because he was an absolute rock at the back, winning every ball, making loads of challenges, and obviously for the fact that he got the pre-assist, as I like to call it, the fact that he was involved in the build-up to our second goal by winning them 2 challenges and flicking the ball forward. For that alone he obviously deserves an 8, but overall, on the whole, I think he defended really well, and certainly for the games going forward is going to be really important. So now I'm going to move on to the final player in our back 4, and that is of course the left back Patrick Van Aanholt, who I'm going to give a 5 overall. Now in terms of Van Aanholt's performance, I suppose it's a performance which is really reflective of the last sort of few games or so, in the fact that he started the season quite lacklustre, started to get back into it, and he's sort of gone back to his old ways in the fact that he's not necessarily absolutely terrible in the game, but he's certainly not as effective as we know he can be, and certainly I do think the 5 is a fair reflection of that. Now of course I could talk all day about his defensive work, because even though we kept a clean sheet, he certainly was the weakest out of our back 4, and one of the reasons for that is just because he kept giving the ball away. Now of course we didn't get punished in them certain situations, but nevertheless, you know, as a fullback especially, you don't want to be giving the ball away, which will allow the opposition to put balls into the box. So whilst we didn't get punished with it, it was obviously a little bit disappointing to see him give the ball away quite cheaply, but I do think on the whole he wasn't absolutely terrible defensively. And that's why I've given him a 5 overall, because I suppose it's the benefit of the doubt in the fact that I saw certain bits of his game which were alright, you know, not brilliant, but quite average. And then there were other parts, like giving the ball away, like, you know, just giving away possession too easily. Stuff like that was a little bit annoying, but I still don't. I think it's just a reflection of his performances at the moment, in the fact that he's having a pretty average season. And I think he even came out after the game. I know he came out after the game and basically admitted on Twitter, I'm very happy for the result, but my performance individually wasn't that great. So the fact that he knows individually that his performances are not great is of course good to see, because that's what you want from players. You know, you want players who obviously play well, but then on the other hand, if they're not playing well, you want them to accept it and obviously work on that. And having seen, you know, the goals he's scored and the defensive tackles he's made previously, I do think that actually on reflection, I'm sure he'll reflect over the week and come back for West Ham with not necessarily a changed mindset, but just, you know, we're looking to change his performances. And certainly the fact that we've seen it previously where he might go through a rough spell and then comes out and be absolutely brilliant. So hopefully, having reflected on that game and having openly admitted it, hopefully he can come into the next game a better player. But like I've said already, I've given him a 5 because I don't think he was absolutely terrible, but certainly far from his best. Now, in terms of his play down the left-hand side, I do think he tried to offer something going forward and tried to offer us a little bit more width than, of course, we've seen from him recently. And obviously that was great because he was looking to get forward and looking to hit Fulham on the counter-attack. So yes, that was great, but he just lacked that final ball and it wasn't really there. So, and I suppose that's something we've seen quite a lot this season, in the fact that at the beginning of the season he was fairly good defensively, but he seemed to neglect his forward play. And then we've seen sort of a switch where, you know, he got his defensive play spot on and started to go forward a little bit more. But now he sort of took one step back, and now he took 2 back as well, in the fact that he was starting to get better, but now he's gone back to his old ways where he's not necessarily terrible defensively, he's just ineffective going forward, which of course is something we do know that he's really good at. And I suppose if that final ball had been there, you know, if he'd just been looking to cross into the box or looking to do a few more 1-2s, then maybe we would have seen a little bit more influence going forward from him. But the fact that he was, you know, lacking that little bit going forward, lacking that little quality ball, whether that be a cross or a shot, that was something that was a little bit disappointing. And in terms of just his overall performance, I think he was just a little bit hesitant defensively at times. So rather than doing what Wan-Bissaka does in terms of winning that crunch tackle or, you know, just getting the ball away from the opposition, Vanano on the other hand, albeit he wasn't terrible defensively, there were a few times where he was a little bit hesitant, you know, not looking to make a challenge. And of course, you look back at the few times he gave the ball away, rather than him just hoofing the ball away and getting it out of danger or putting it out for a throw-in, he'd try and play the ball out for the back or try to attempt a pass, which really isn't doable. So maybe you could say defensively, it may not necessarily just be about the tackling, but maybe the fact that he's not able to play the ball out from the back as well as some of the other players is, personally for me, is one of the reasons why I felt he was hesitant at the back. But overall for me, not really too much to say about his performance, hence why I've given him a 5. But hopefully we can see his form, you know, improve a bit over the next few weeks or so, because we know there's a good player on there and he's not necessarily being absolutely terrible, he's just being slightly ineffective. And certainly given the fact that we've seen his qualities in seasons gone by, it of course would be great to see them. So of course, comment below with your thoughts about Van Aanholt's performance, you know, whether you do think that their lack of competition now at left back, when you consider Jeffrey Schlupp was the competition, but now he's playing in central midfield, so obviously maybe that lack of competition seems to be affecting his performance and he seems to be too comfortable at left back. But whatever it is, it would obviously be nice for him to improve his performances going forward. And even though he's only scored 1 goal this season, it'd be nice to see him score a few more goals like he done last season, because certainly we know he's got the skill to do so, and I certainly think that will up his game to the next level. So overall, Patrick Van Aanholt here, the left back, I'm going to give him a 5 overall. So I'm going to move on now to the first player in our midfield, and that is of course the captain, Luka Milivojevic, who I'm going to give a 7 overall. Now, in terms of Luka's performance, you know, this is something which I tend to repeat with his performances, in the fact that he's very tenacious in midfield, always looking to get involved, making tackles, making blocks, and just being that protection in front of the back four. And that's exactly what he'd done here against Fulham, mainly because, you know, he had James McArthur and Jeffrey Schlupp in front of him, and of course they were the more advanced players. So obviously with Luka being that main defensive player, I thought we'd done a very decent job there. And just going back to that point about Mitrovic in particular, you know, when you consider you've got not only your back four defending, but you've got someone like Luka just giving that shield and giving them that extra protection in front of the back four. When you've got someone like that doing that job, it really does seem to make an impact. People may just say it's essentially you just parking the bus, or you're just putting players in that defensive position to stop, you know, your opposition going through. But actually it's a really important role, and certainly Luka done a fantastic job in terms of restricting Fulham in the midfield, albeit they had more possession than us. But he just was basically that rock in front of the back four, making it very difficult for them to get past. And, you know, when you consider the few chances that Fulham had, it came from them getting past essentially the back four. The fact that there was so little of them chances really just goes to show not only how well the back four were defending, but actually that protection in front of them seemed to really limit Fulham as well. Now, of course, he's obviously one of our top scorers this season, and certainly in terms of penalties, he's the top scorer in the Premier League. And, you know, when he stepped up for that penalty after the handball, which obviously Benteke was involved with, after I think it was Christie for Fulham made the handball. Obviously Luka Milivojevic, we obviously seen him, I think he's only missed 2 penalties for Palace, so of course it was quite inevitable that he was going to score it, and of course he made no mistake from that. Obviously gave us the lead, a very powerful penalty, and even though Rico, the Fulham keeper, did obviously go the right way, and I think Mitrovic did actually point at that direction, so Rico knew what way to go. Even though that was the case, because there was so much pace on it, because there was so much whip on it, and because it wasn't necessarily bottom corner, it wasn't necessarily top bins, it was just right in the middle, it obviously was the right height and the right speed and the right spin to obviously get it past Rico. So the fact that he combined what was a very good defensive performance in front of the back four, that midfield, that defensive midfield role, the fact that he done that to perfection, as well as the fact that he got yet another goal for Palace, very well taken penalty, was of course good to see. And I suppose his celebration as well, which is the thumbnail of the podcast, that was also quite special as well. And I do think it was something to do with his kids, you know, they were in the boxes, so he thought he'd do sort of the lion claw thing to them. But certainly well-deserved goal in the fact that he performed well, so it was nice to see him get a goal. And I suppose the only reason which I couldn't really give him an 8 for his performance is just the fact that we didn't have a lot of possession in the game, because we were happy for Fulham to pass the ball around so that we could hit them on the counter-attack. Yes, that's fair enough, and that's fine. If it works, that's a great tactic. But people like Luka in particular was just being a little bit loose in possession, giving the ball away a little bit too cheaply for me. But whilst that was the only negative of his game, once again, the fact that he just sort of put that aside with that great protection for the back four, and certainly when Fulham were, a lot of their attacks were focused down that left-hand side and down the middle. So of course you need your fullbacks to be on top duty, which of course Wan-Bissaka was, and then of course you need your midfielders to give protection to the back four to obviously stop the opposition breaking down the middle. So the fact that Luka done a great job in giving protection to the back four, whilst also just basically essentially just being like making life difficult for Fulham, was of course good to see. But like I've said already, the thing that's really limiting him to a 7 is just purely based on the fact that yes, Fulham had loads of possession, but we were just giving them even more possession, which of course they didn't really need. And if we held on to the ball a little bit more with the likes of Milivojevic, with the likes of Vanano, then maybe we could have had a little bit more control of the game. Obviously we were in control in the fact that we were a lot more clinical in terms of our counter-attacking play. But obviously it would have been a little bit more nicer for us to actually have a little bit more of the ball as opposed to giving it away. So Luka Milivojevic here, the captain, a good performance from him. And when you consider his performance in midweek, in terms of his on-field play was obviously good. But of course I criticised him in terms of his captain's play. So the fact that we came into this game without our talisman Wilfried Zaha, the fact that Luka seemed to, you know, really sort of get the guys and get the lads ready for the game, get them sort of geared up for the game. The fact that he'd done that was obviously great to see, and obviously it was an improvement on the game in midweek against Southampton, where of course I criticised him for not necessarily doing his captain's role exactly as you would expect in terms of stopping Wilf getting sent off. So the fact that he came into this game here without Wilf, obviously without our talisman, and just managed to sort of get the lads ready, I suppose, and just get them up for this game and get them raring for the game was of course good to see. So once again here, Luka Milivojevic, a 7 for him, scored what was a very powerful penalty with lots of spin and lots of accuracy in terms of the positioning, and of course combine that with what was yet another good defensive performance. So I'm going to move on now to our second player in our midfield, and that is of course James McArthur, who I'm going to give a 5 overall. Now obviously McArthur has been one of these players this season, and certainly over the last sort of few months or so, where he's been a little bit hot and cold. You know, you look at the Man City game, I thought he was great, and in a few games after that he wasn't great. So I do think the phrase hot and cold is really perfect to describe his performance here. Now in terms of his performance here in the first half in particular, I think he was fairly quiet, and you know, when you consider it was sort of even in the game in terms of 50-50 in terms of how each team was playing, I do think it was obviously either side was going to take the lead. And of course, I suppose you could use the phrase a knife edge in the fact that either team could have scored and that goal would have seen who would go on to win the game. So obviously it was quite a tight first half, and arguably both teams weren't necessarily at 100%. And of course McArthur seemed to sort of suffer from that. And I personally think it's just because he was fairly quiet, wasn't looking to get involved, and essentially wasn't doing what he has done recently in the fact that just hurrying around the midfield and essentially just having lots of energy, which of course we know he's really good at. Now the only real contribution he made in that first half was of course he was the guy who instigated the penalty. So of course I'll go on to talk about Benteke in a minute, in the fact that he was the guy who, I think it was Christie who was battling with him, and of course Benteke was going to get to the ball, but Christie tried to get in the way and obviously handballed it. But actually it was McArthur who caused that by actually putting the ball into the box in the first place. He was trying to find Benteke, but of course the handball came from that. So whilst McArthur was fairly quiet, he actually had quite a telling impact on the game, in the fact that he was the guy who caused us to get the penalty in the first place, and of course Luka was the guy to go on and score it. So like I've said, whilst he was fairly quiet and quite ineffective in that first half, not terrible but ineffective, of course he was the guy who brought about our lead in the game, and certainly that did help us, especially going into that second half. Rather than doing what we did against Southampton and sit deep and try and get the 1-0, the fact that we went out second half and tried to push and tried to get that second goal was of course good to see, and it all came from McArthur having that persistence to put the ball into the box, put the Fulham defence under pressure, which of course caused them to give away the handball. Now in terms of the second half, I thought he was a little bit better, and certainly not enough improvement in terms of the first and second half to maybe give him a 6 overall, but I do think the fact that he got into a lot more advanced areas in that second half was of course good to see, and the fact that when Meyer came on, who of course most people were calling to start, the fact that when he came on it allowed McArthur once again to go even further forward was quite excellent to see, and it really just begs the question as to whether Meyer should start the game, in the fact that he makes such an impact coming off the bench, not only in terms of Meyer's personal creativity, but the fact that how he brings other players into the game it obviously begs the question as to whether he should be starting, because obviously he made McArthur improve, so if we actually start Meyer, then maybe he could have a more telling impact on the game. And obviously, with us getting into more advanced areas in the second half, of course we had a lot more shots in the game, and there was one in particular. Ayu's got into the box, tried to have a shot, but of course James McArthur got in the way of the shot, which really was quite irritating, in the fact that if that had gone in, I think it would have been 2-0 at that point, and certainly would have killed the game off. And if we'd go on to get the other goal, 3-0, would have been a very nice margin to win the game by. But nevertheless, the fact that he improved in the second half was of course great to see, because like I've said, he was quite quiet in the first half. But nevertheless, it shouldn't really take, someone like Meyer coming off the bench to actually improve your performances. And obviously that's the reason, which I think is quite fair, why quite a lot of people are questioning not necessarily McArthur's quality, just the fact that maybe someone like Meyer, who's got a little bit more creativity, a little bit more pace in the midfield, would of course be a better choice. But overall, James McArthur here, not the worst, not the best performance, and certainly does deserve the 5 I've given him. I suppose you could argue a game of 2 halves in the fact that he was quiet in the first half, but of course in the second half he was of course getting more involved in advanced positions, and if he hadn't have got in the way of Ayu's shot, then maybe we could have won the game by a bigger margin. So now I'm going to move on to the final player in our midfield, and that is Jeffrey Schlupp, who I'm going to give a 7 overall. Now obviously Jeffrey Schlupp is a player who's come up for quite a lot of debate recently, because he's obviously scored, this was his 4th goal he scored of the season, and of course in some games he's been absolutely terrible, but then in others, like the one he scored goals, he's been quite effective. So of course before the game, when we obviously heard that Chiku Kiyate and Wilfried Zaha were out, obviously we know about Zaha, but we weren't quite sure about Kiyate. So of course when we knew that, we obviously had quite a lot of debate as to who would start, and obviously most of us predicted either Connor Wickham or Christian Benteke would start in the place of Zaha, and then it was going to be between Meyer or Schlupp to start in that position. Now of course Jeffrey Schlupp played there, and if you looked on Twitter you would have think the world was ending with the amount of I suppose how people go mad in the fact that Jeffrey Schlupp was starting the game. But actually, as part of a midfield 3, like he has done when he's played in the midfield 3, he's been very effective. So obviously in this game here, playing in the midfield 3, I thought he done really well, and it was nice to see Hodgson after the game come out in the interview and basically say that Jeffrey Schlupp is a very versatile player. He can play at left back, he can play as a left-sided midfielder, or he can play as the left-sided midfielder in a midfield 3. So the fact that Roy Hodgson obviously knows his 3 main positions, but also is able to utilise it, because we thought he was only good as a left back. But the fact that Hodgson's moved him into this central midfield role and then occasionally out wide really just goes to show how adaptable he is. But also Roy Hodgson seems to be getting the best out of him, albeit he might frustrate people at times. Performances like the one at the weekend against Fulham show that he can actually do a job there, and certainly I do think in midfield 2 he's not quite good enough, but actually in a midfield 3, because of that pace he brings to the side, he gives us a really nice balance. Now of course in terms of his starting position here against Fulham, obviously depending on which way you look at the formation, you could do a 4-4-2, but then I'm looking at it going it's more of a 4-3-3. So whichever way you look at it, Jeffrey Schlupp was obviously on the left hand side, so whether that be in a 4-4-2 playing out wide, or whether it be in a 4-3-3 him playing as a narrow left player, so whichever way you look at it, that was obviously he was primarily on that left hand side. And even though that was his main position, he didn't spend too much time sort of hugging the touchline, which goes to show actually how his game against Fulham was more centred about being down the middle and driving down the middle and giving protection to the back 4, as opposed to actually playing out wide and trying to be a winger. So the fact that he was converted to that midfield role, the fact that he was looking to get involved in play in the middle was of course good to see. And like I've said, even though you could argue that it was a left midfield position, the fact that he didn't actually spend that much time on either flank or on the flank really just goes to show how narrow and how quite central his game was. And I actually do think that it gets the best out of him, and certainly for the team as well, because it gives us the pace in midfield, but also the fact that he's got that agility to run into the box, as we saw with the goal in terms of making late runs into the box. He's got that ability, so it was nice to see him playing in a position which seems to utilise it. Now obviously because he was playing quite narrow, he obviously occasionally drifted out wide, and instead of obviously drifting from wide going inwards, he obviously was drifting from the inner areas of the field going outwards, and obviously that seemed to help us, because especially on the counter-attack when we obviously needed to get numbers out wide, the fact that Jeffrey Schlupp was able to go out wide and drift out to that left hand side was of course good to see, and obviously it came to a benefit of us because on the counter attack when we were very potent, if you add in Jeffrey Schlupp's pace as well from coming into the middle, coming out wide, that really did seem to help us. Now of course in that first half in particular, when we were looking to get on the counter attack, he was obviously involved quite a lot, but most of it didn't really come to avail. It wasn't really that successful, but nevertheless the fact that he's got that intent offensively by, you know, even though he's playing in central midfield, looking to get out wide, looking to get the ball out wide, the fact that he's got that intent, albeit nothing really came of it, was of course good to see. Now obviously, much like McArthur, you know, his performance improved after half time, and his performance in the first half wasn't terrible, maybe a 6, but obviously his performance in the second half, the fact that he ended up getting the goal as well, really just epitomised what was a fairly good performance from him, obviously deserving of the 7. Now obviously in terms of chances he had in the game, aside from the goal, there was one that he forced Sergio Rico into a good save. Once again, driving down the middle, he had a shot through on goal, looked destined for a top corner. Obviously, it probably, arguably, Rico, even if Rico wasn't there, it probably might have come off a crossbar or the bar may have been in the way, but nevertheless had a chance and obviously forced the goalkeeper into a save, which that's exactly what we want. You know, this season we haven't been taking our chances, and we've had loads of chances, we've been creating them, but we haven't been finishing them off. So the fact that it was nice to actually see that we were actually forcing the goalkeeper to do some work by actually just having shots at him inside the box. And I do think Jeffrey Schlupp and Jordan Ayew in particular are two players who I thought had quite a number of shots inside the box in the game, and yes, they didn't score, but the fact that they were actually putting pressure on the goalkeeper was of course good to see. But obviously, because he had such a good performance, it was nice to obviously see him get the reward from, you know, what was a decent display from him, and obviously that was the goal that sealed us all 3 points. So of course against Southampton in midweek we got 1-0 up, and obviously second half we sat deep and tried to ride out the 1-0, whereas here against Fulham, 1-0 in the 25th minute, and then coming out for the second half we were pushing to get that second goal. So the fact that we had the intent was of course good to see. The fact that Jeffrey Schlupp was able to finish it off was of course good to see as well. Now of course it was a tap in from about 2 yards out, in the fact that he was literally, the goalkeeper made the save, it fell to Jeffrey Schlupp and he finished it. But the fact that he found himself in that position in the first place is good, because obviously his positional play was quite good, and obviously the awareness as well to actually see where our play is going. You know, Michy Batshuayi is trying to get past 2 or 3 defenders. Obviously he's had a shot at saved by the goalkeeper, and then obviously Jeffrey's aware to get into the right area to of course score from the rebound. So whilst people would say it's only a tap-in from a few yards out, but actually the awareness and obviously the game, I suppose the game awareness, by actually knowing where to go in the right position, knowing when to do it, and obviously the fact that he was able to finish it quite calmly, even though the goalkeeper was right in front of him, that was of course a very decent thing as well. So overall, Jeffrey Schlupp, I'm going to give him a 7, because, you know, I do think that's a fair reflection. And whilst there was quite a lot of debate before the game as to whether he would start, I do think in the end it was a right result, because it gave us that pace in midfield which otherwise we would have lacked. And of course the fact that he ended up getting the goal in the end anyway just goes to show that actually he is a good player to have into your squad. Yes, he may not be the best player, but, you know, when we had someone like Chiata who's been so good for us this season, he's obviously out injured. It was either between the creativity of Meyer or the pace of Schlupp, and of course Roy Hodgson seems to like Schlupp there. And, you know, even though we would have liked to see Meyer start, he still came off the bench, had a decent amount of time, and obviously had an impact there. So whilst Meyer didn't start the game, he still came on and made an impact. So actually, even though there was a lot of debate as to these two players in particular, they both performed well in the end. So I'm going to move on now to one of the first players in our front three, and that is of course Andros Townsend, who I'm going to give a 6 overall. Now of course Andros Townsend's been on a fantastic run of form of late, and you know that sort of ended against Southampton where he didn't necessarily have that great a game, and maybe it's just because, you know, Wilfried Zaha finally got his goal back and he was starting to have a little bit more influence on the game, or whether it's just the fact that, you know, Southampton done their homework and defended well against him. Now, whatever it was, he obviously didn't have as good as a performance as he had been doing since sort of the beginning of December, but nevertheless, the performance here against Fulham was significantly better, hence why I've given him the 6. Now, of course, Wilfried Zaha was out of the game, which of course I've already mentioned, so we needed someone to step up in the offensive role. Now, whilst Christian Benteke came back into the side and done very well, whilst someone like Jeffrey Schlupp obviously got us that second goal to cement the win for us, whilst that was the case, I do think Andros Townsend was one of our main players, and I suppose Jordan Ayew as well, who actually stood up in the absence of Wilfried Zaha and obviously made themselves count. So the fact that we were missing our talisman, but it didn't really affect our game too much because other players around him stepped up, was of course good to see. And I think something that Talk CPC said after the game in his review, he said essentially that he didn't actually notice that Wolf wasn't on the pitch, and that really just goes to show obviously how well we were playing as a team, but also how well other players stepped up, because obviously there's no doubt that Wilfried Zaha's a fantastic player and he's obviously one of our greatest and certainly had a mass in the team when he's playing well. But actually this game here goes to show that A, we can win without him, but also B, that we've actually got players who are capable of stepping up, which of course was good to see. Now, in terms of Townsend's involvement in the first half, there was obviously one towards the end. Obviously, we've gone 1-0 up. We're on the counter-attack again. Obviously, Townsend's found himself with the ball on the right-hand side. Cut inside like he always likes to do. Put the ball onto the feet of Benteke. Benteke's attempted a bicycle kick. And yes, that went off the crossbar. But actually, that moment in itself, in terms of the bicycle kick, sticks out. But also the fact that Townsend put in that cross, which was absolutely pinpoint, was another thing that really did impress me. Now, of course, if we'd scored that goal, no one would stop talking about it, because of course Benteke would have scored. Obviously Townsend is probably goal of the season, but it would have been up there if we had scored that one at the weekend against Fulham. But nevertheless, I still think the cross, if he had scored the bicycle kick, obviously that would have been great. But the cross itself was obviously something that really did impress me, because you've seen in recent weeks where Townsend has gone from one extreme to the other, scoring fantastic goals, but then he hasn't been getting as many crosses in as he used to. Other times where he was playing up top, so he was limited. So it was nice to see him go back to his old self, where he was looking to get balls into the box by cutting inside. He done exactly that and almost created what could have been one of our goals of the season. So that, in terms of his first half involvement, it was mainly surrounded around that, which of course was good to see. But aside from that, I think he worked really hard in the team in terms of running down the flank, looking to create space. And like I said already, he created that fantastic cross, put other crosses in, but that one particular for Benteke, who obviously smashed his effort across the bar, was of course good to see as well. Now, in terms of his second half performance, I think it was much the same in the fact that he was working hard up top, looking to get involved. And I suppose one of the reasons I was impressed with his performance is just his patience in the game, because obviously we were trying to get that second goal, and you people like Townsend, Benteke, Ayew, who are obviously going forward, pushing to get that second goal. And arguably you can understand him being a little bit frustrated, because he didn't necessarily get that many chances to obviously either assist or actually get the goal, which of course would make it 2-0. So of course you can understand him being a little bit impatient there, but the fact that he actually stayed patient, stayed calm, and obviously was quite key to actually us doubling the lead is of course good to see. And that's what you want to see from players. You want to see players who, even if it's not going their way and you're trying to do something, which in our case was actually get that second goal, the fact that they remained calm, the fact that Andros Townsend kept doing what he's doing, and then when he had the chance finally, he's obviously able to supply the ball to Batshuayi, who of course had the shot, and of course Jeffrey Schlupp scored from the rebound. So the fact that he waited for his chance to obviously help us get the second goal, and the fact that he obviously came provider for that, was of course good to see as well. And obviously I'm going to talk about Batshuayi in a minute in terms of his work inside the box, but of course it was Max Meyer and Andros Townsend who were actually involved in terms of moving the ball from the halfway line up to the edge of the penalty box, and of course Townsend was the guy who supplied Batshuayi for the goal. So obviously, even though he wasn't involved as much as he would have liked to be, when it mattered, when we were looking right at the end of the game to get that second goal to kill the game off, the fact that Townsend was involved and obviously gets the pre-assist, as I like to call it, because he was the guy who assisted the assister, that was of course good to see as well. But overall, I do think he is fully deserving of the 6, working hard, looking to be that spark, which of course we were missing with Zaha. So the fact that he was looking to replace him in the side with his performance was of course good to see. And I do think, his best moment of the game was of course when he supplied that fantastic cross for Christian Benteke to bicycle kick, albeit it came off the bar. So overall, I do think the 6 is a fair result. So I'm going to move on now to one of our strikers, or whichever way you look at our formation, obviously the second player in our front three, and that is of course Christian Benteke, who I'm actually going to give a 7 overall for his performance. Now obviously before I go on to talk about his performance, I might as well say, obviously Benteke has been out injured since I think it's the 4th or something of September, so he's been injured for quite a long time. So of course, coming back into this game here, he's only played a few games off the bench, so you can understand him being a little bit rusty, but he was actually far from that and actually put in a really decent performance, considering he hasn't played since September. Or he's played, I think, one performance off the bench, which is barely 15 minutes or so. So aside from that, he hasn't played much football. So the fact that he looked as fit as he did and actually performed as well as he did was of course good to see. And in terms of what Hodgson said after the game, he said that the sports science people had said that they wouldn't expect Benteke to do more than 45 minutes. So the fact that he went on in the game and still managed to do 60 minutes is a credit to him. Obviously, hopefully we didn't push him too hard in the fact that he could have, sort of irritated the injury, but nevertheless, you've got someone who's just come back from an injury and isn't really expected to play that much. So the fact that he played more than the 45 minutes which they predicted was of course good to see. It just goes to show the character he's got and the fact that he's just overcome these injuries and he's continuing just to overcome little hurdles. So rather than, obviously he's been coming in little bit by little bit in terms of training, so it was obviously nice to see him actually fully introduced in the game and play the majority of the game and certainly make a telling impact. Now, in terms of something which we all know he's good at, you know, in terms of using his physicality, and he used that to his advantage quite a lot here against Fulham, you know, especially sort of the aerial duels where there's some of them that you wouldn't really expect him to win. You know, you'll think Fulham defenders, that's a really easy ball for them to clear. So the fact that Benteke won quite a lot of these aerial duels, which you wouldn't normally expect him to get, yes, he's physical, but he couldn't really win that battle against the centre-back. So the fact that on a number of occasions he was able to deal with that was, of course, good to see. But the thing that we've been missing this season, you know, yes, Benteke's been on a bad run of form in terms of scoring goals, but in terms of his contribution to the side, that's something we've missed drastically, and that's something he brought to the game here against Fulham. You know, that sheer presence in terms of his physicality with his height, and I suppose his hold up and link up play as well. That presence he brought to the side was obviously great to see, and it's something we've been missing. So when you have someone like that who's just come back into the side, giving you something you haven't seen or haven't had in ages, really obviously gives you a boost and really seem to improve our performances. And obviously that's something we really missed this season, because if we had someone like Benteke, yes, he obviously hasn't scored in a while, but just having someone like that who has that presence really could have helped us in some of the games gone by. Now, one of the moments in particular which of course his presence was made known is of course when Cyrus Christie, obviously he was too strong for him, and obviously they've both tried to go to ball, and Christie's quite obvious, can see that Benteke is going to win it, so of course he's tried to block him off and obviously handballed it. So whilst Benteke isn't directly involved in that, in the fact that he's the guy who didn't force him to handball it, but the fact that he was, or it looked like he was going to win the ball, and Christie obviously had to try and stop him and then handballed it in the process, really just goes to show that yes, he wasn't directly involved, but he was still involved in some sense in the fact that he forced Christie into that mistake in the first place. And of course, no complaints about the handball just inside the area, and of course Milivojevic scores to make it 1-0. So even though he's only played 25 minutes at that point, he made a telling contribution. Yes, he won't get an assist for it, but he made a telling contribution, obviously by forcing the defender to make that mistake. Now obviously I talked about Townsend already in terms of supplying that fantastic cross for Benteke to hit on the bicycle kick, and obviously that was absolutely spectacular. That was a very acrobatic effort. But the only worrying thing for me personally is that you've just come back from an injury, albeit it was his knee as opposed to any other part of his body. But obviously we've seen him score bicycle kicks before, but you just got to be careful, because yes, it looks spectacular if it does come off, but if you fall funny or if you land funny, you could injure yourself. So whilst it's good when it goes right, which it almost went right for us because the ball almost came off the bar, but then on the other hand you're looking at it going, yes, it looks great, but maybe you've just come back from an injury, so you need to be a little bit more careful. But overall, I do think that chance is obviously good to see. And, albeit he hasn't scored any bicycle kicks for us, the fact that we've seen him do it at Liverpool, and the fact that he's actually attempted it, really just goes to show that he seems to be back to his best. He's had that lengthy spell out with an injury, and it seems to have improved him. He seems to have been able to recuperate, get his energy back, and certainly with his performance here in terms of using his physicality, that energy he has in the game, that seems to really improve. So if he can continue trying to attempt acrobatic efforts, that would be great to see, because if we've got someone like Townsend who can supply the ball, someone like Zaha when he moves back wide supplying the balls, then of course that's something that Benteke is going to thrive on. So hopefully we can see not only more of the crosses coming in, but of course more efforts like that from Benteke, attempting stuff which you wouldn't normally expect someone to attempt, which of course could end up with something good. Now, after the break, going into the second half, he obviously continued to trouble the Fulham defence, but obviously I suppose it wasn't surprising in the fact that Roy Hodgson came out and said he was probably only expected to play 45 minutes. So the fact that he still continued to trouble the Fulham defence was of course good to see, because he's not 100% fit, so the fact that he was still causing them problems is of course a great thing, and certainly on his way to getting back to his best is obviously a positive thing. But obviously it was understandable when he got withdrawn. Yes, people obviously I think there was a few people booing, which I really don't understand. But Roy Hodgson had to make the sub because I think it was right, you know. Yes, people were quite surprised that he obviously got withdrawn, but when you consider he was only meant to play 45 minutes and ended up playing 65 minutes, is of course credit to him because of how long he could last for. But also, you know, he's just come back from an injury. You don't want to put him out there and he ends up getting another one. So I personally understand why he was taken off, because you don't want to risk it. So even though he was still causing problems for the defence in the or the Fulham defence in that second half, he obviously wasn't as effective doing that as he was in the first half. And understandably, even though he was still doing the shift, I can understand why people were frustrated. But like I said already, obviously I think it was the right time to take him off. And I personally would have taken or made a different substitution as opposed to the one Roy Hodgson made, in terms of taking Benteke off, and I think he brought Meyer on, or yeah, he brought Meyer on in that situation. I maybe would have changed that and brought Batshuayi on a little bit earlier, but nevertheless, a substitution which I personally can understand and didn't really affect what was a very good performance from Benteke. So once again, I do think he fully deserves a 7. You know, the fact that he was very physical, winning aerial duels, and some of them which you wouldn't really expect him to win because they're pretty easy for the defenders, and the fact that he brought back that presence that we've been missing in recent weeks was of course good to see. And of course, if he had scored that wonderful bicycle kick, then of course we'd all be talking about it, and I certainly wouldn't stop talking about it for the weeks to come. But overall, a good performance from him, and certainly a step in the right direction in terms of his recovery from his injury. So I'm going to move on now to the final player, and that is the striker or winger, whichever way you look at it, and that's of course Jordan Ayew, who I'm going to give a 6 overall. Now obviously, I've talked already in terms of Max Meyer and James McArthur, in fact that there was obviously debate as to who would start in the absence of Jeffrey Schlupp, and obviously in the end that Jeffrey Schlupp ended up playing. And of course there was obviously a debate as to whether who would start in the place of Wilfried Zaha, and I personally in my prediction video predicted that Connor Wickham would start, but of course he was allegedly injured. That was never confirmed, but he was allegedly injured. But nevertheless, Benteke came in instead of Wickham, and essentially it was 50-50 as to which one of those would start anyway. So of course, playing up front, Jordan Ayew was playing with Benteke, and actually I do think he done a decent job, and I do think as a partnership, him and Ayew seem to play really well together, but also they seem to complement each other, because you've got the pace of Ayew, and obviously you've got the physicality of Benteke. So whilst Ayew may not be the best quality player in terms of finishing chances, or you know, he's not one of the best strikers because he's sort of a striker who's been converted from a winger. He may not be the best, but actually up top with Benteke, he seems to get the best out of both of them. Now, obviously, the only negative from his performance, and really the reason why I've given Benteke a 7, but I've only given Jordan Ayew a 6, is just the fact that in the opening 10 minutes or so, little silly foul which Jordan Ayew made. You know, the balls or the referee's already called up for a foul, and obviously Jordan Ayew's just stepped on the back of the player. Obviously, you could say he probably could have stopped that, and it was a little bit silly. But then it's not really. He's not looking to hurt the player. He's just sort of still running through from the free kick. So yes, it was a little bit of a silly yellow card to pick out. But then, understandably, sometimes you're not aware of the players around you, or you're just a little bit silly. But whatever it was, obviously that's the reason why he's sort of limited, in my opinion, to a 6. It's just the fact that he picked up that yellow card literally 10 minutes into the game. Because aside from that, it was a really good performance from him, and I really do want to give him a 7 overall. But because of that yellow card, going to limit him to a 6. But I suppose I think this is something I said after the Southampton game. You know, I thought that was, even though it was disappointing, I said that was one of his best performances in a Palace shirt. And obviously he hasn't had that many great games in a Palace shirt. But actually, this game here arguably has got to be up there with one of his best games in a Palace shirt. And the reason I say that is because not only do I feel it, but I've seen a lot of people say that on Twitter. So of course, he may not have scored or may not have assisted in this game, but actually his contribution was obviously one of his best in a Palace shirt. So I do think the fact that he performed well was of course good to see. And obviously with Batshuayi coming in now, maybe we'll see Batshuayi start in the place of Jordan Ayew. But nevertheless, the fact that we've now got options up top with Benteke, with Batshuayi, with Ayew, with Zaha, the fact that we've now got good options up top who can give competition to each other, even Connor Wickham to that when he's not injured. You know, we've got a plethora of options up top now, so that's obviously going to do us the world of good. Now, of course, in terms of going back to that foul, I've just remembered it was on Seri in terms of the foul, so he's obviously just run into the back of him, and of course because of that he obviously had to be a little bit more careful for the rest of the game. But that didn't really seem to affect his performance, because he was being so careful. He didn't make stupid challenges, and actually the only sort of challenges he did make were when he was chasing down the back four of Fulham and essentially
making them or causing them to make mistakes by putting pressure on them. So even though he was booked, he was still able to put himself about a bit somewhat, and obviously still cause problems for the opposition. Now, in terms of a chance he had in the game, I talked about Jeffrey Schlupp, and I added sort of Ayew into that section in the fact that these were two players who had quite a few shots through on goal. And of course, the one that Jordan Ayew had in particular, it was early into the second half. Obviously, Jordan Ayew's got 3 in the box, had a shot, and obviously Sergio Rico made the save. So obviously I've talked about recently where Jordan Ayew's been absolutely fantastic in terms of his forward play by having lots of energy, chasing down the back four. His hold-up play and build-up play is obviously good, but obviously he was lacking that final ball. So it was obviously nice to see him here against Fulham, actually looking to make drives into the box and essentially continue doing his link-up and hold-up play, which he obviously does always very well. But the fact that he was able to combine that with the fact that he was forcing the goalkeeper into good saves, and especially so early on in the second half, was of course good to see. And the thing that I was sort of worried about is the fact that we've seen us get the lead against Southampton and sit deep. So actually it was quite nice to see us actually try and attack, try and go on the counter-attack against Fulham in that second half, because obviously that allowed us to push for that second goal, and eventually it did come. So the fact that Ayew was one of the many players in the team actually looking to work hard and looking to get that goal in that second half to cement our win was of course good to see. But arguably, even though you could argue he was one of the hardest working players on the pitch, he obviously wasn't able to get that final goal. Now my final point really for me, and this is one of the reasons why that if he didn't get a yellow card I certainly would have given him a 7, it's just the fact that how effective he was in terms of putting pressure on the opposition defence, chasing down every ball, causing them to make rash clearances. That was obviously very good about his play. But also for me, and this is something which I said or I emphasised quite a lot against Southampton, is just the fact that his hold-up play and link-up play was very good. So the fact that alongside Benteke, Benteke was the main striker and Ayew was playing just off him. So the fact that the hold-up play in terms of holding up the ball for each other, looking to get others involved, and the fact that he was linking up with the other players, in midfield and out wide, that was of course really quite impressive to see, and quite promising in the fact that when Benteke comes back into the side, we see Ayew also play well, and they seem to have a partnership that's really good as well and really strong. So overall, Jordan Ayew, I do think he does deserve the 6 I've given him. So I'm going to move quickly on to the subs now. Obviously we made 3 subs in this game. Obviously Max Meyer and Michy Batshuayi obviously came on sort of with 20 or so minutes to go, and of course Bakary Sakho, not really going to give him a rating because he was essentially came on right at the end of the game with like 2 minutes to go, and that was just to give us a little bit more pace. And when you consider the skill he showed just to drag the ball out wide and make space in behind just to waste time essentially, that he was obviously brought on to do that. So I can't really give him a rating because he was on the pitch. He was barely on the pitch, but I still think he came on and done a shift. Now in terms of the subs, I might as well start with Max Meyer. I'm going to give him a 6 overall, and I arguably could have given him a 7, but I do think because he wasn't on the pitch quite enough, I think a 6 is a fair reflection of that. And of course he was the guy who came off from Benteke, which of course is a substitution that I understand, and the reason he came on was just to provide us with that creative spark, which of course we had been missing in that second half, because we were looking to get the goal, we were creating chances, putting pressure on to get that all important second goal, but it hadn't necessarily come for us. So bring on Max Meyer for Benteke and move Ayew back up top, and obviously that allowed Max Meyer to not only improve people like James McArthur, but also just allowed him to show his creativity by getting the ball forward, looking to pass it out. So of course that was something which was really impressive for me, and this is something that didn't really come as a surprise to me because I've seen him do it so many times this season. But the fact that he's got that positive attacking attitude, in the fact that he's always looking to get forward, especially when he has possession of the ball, so rather than just passing it around, he's looking to drive forward, looking to find a pass. So the fact that he was doing that was of course good to see. And in terms of the performance here, he showed enough for me personally in that sort of 20 minutes or so to show that he's good enough, or he's done enough to actually warrant a start next week. Because you look at McArthur's performance here against Fulham at the weekend, yes, it wasn't the greatest, but it wasn't the worst. But maybe Max Meyer, because he came on, made such an impact, was providing us with that creative spark we've been missing. Obviously I think it's a perfectly valid argument to argue that he should start next week. And obviously the fact that he was obviously involved in our second goal as well, albeit he was looking to get the ball in and Andros Townsend took it off him. They'd done another 1-2, and then Townsend obviously got the ball to Batshuayi, and he obviously caused the goalkeeper to make a save and Schlupp scored from it. But nevertheless, the fact that Meyer was involved in that build-up play was of course good to see, And whilst you don't get credit for that, because obviously you're not the guy who assisted it, you're still going to get credit, or from me in particular, because you were quite instrumental in terms of getting the ball forward. So once again, another impressive performance from the young German. And like I've said, I do think personally for me, do comment below with your thoughts, but I do think he's done enough to start their next game. Now in terms of the sub, obviously Michy Batshuayi came on with about 10 minutes to go, and obviously he's our new signing. Obviously I stayed up till about 12 o'clock that morning to actually see the club announce it, because of course it came out the blue, so I thought I'm not going to miss this announcement. And obviously the excitement was building over Twitter, and actually I do think the excitement is valid, because as he's shown in this little cameo here, he's got lots of quality, and of course he's going to be a big player for us going forward. Now in terms of his performance here, I'm going to give him a 7, because in that 10 minutes he was on the field, not only did he show his quality, but of course he was instrumental in us getting that second goal to make it 2-0. And of course, whilst the plaudits are going to go on Jeffrey Schlupp, he scored his 4th goal of the season, it all came from Andros Townsend, Max Meyer and Michy Batshuayi's work. Obviously Townsend and Meyer getting the ball into the box, and of course Michy Batshuayi dribbling past 2 or 3 defenders, having a shot which looked to be going in the top corner, and of course forcing the goalkeeper into a save, and then palming the ball into Schlupp's path. So even though he was only on the pitch for 10 minutes, he made an impact because he got the assist. Now, it doesn't technically count as an assist because it deflected off a goalkeeper, but nevertheless, in terms of fantasy football, it counts as an assist, so I'm going to take that. But, like I've said already, the fact that he came on, was looking to get into the box, had a few shots himself, and obviously just looked to be a much better option than we've had recently this season. His movement, his quality on the ball, and the fact that he was able to dribble past a few players and get a shot away, that's what we've been missing this season, and hopefully that's something he can bring to the side going forward. Now of course, aside from the goal that he obviously assisted, he obviously had another time to test Rico with a decent shot, and even though he was only on the pitch for 10 minutes, he was obviously quite busy, and like I've said already, even though he was only on the pitch for that short period of time, he showed me enough in that game to show, that he's going to be a good signing for us. And I do think some people say you sometimes overhype players, but based on what we've seen here, based on the record that Batshuayi's got, he's got more goals than he has starts for the clubs he's played for. It really goes to show the quality he's got. So hopefully we'll begin to see that this season. And of course, the final substitution, Bukayo Saka, I've already mentioned him already, but other than one sort of dangerous cross he put into the area, which of course only almost resulted in an own goal, put in a delicious cross, and of course the defender didn't quite listen to Rico, and obviously he was going to save it or catch it, and of course the defenders tried to hoof it out and put it out for a corner. So even though Bukayo Saka was only on for a short period of time, had impact in the fact that he was looking to get the ball into the box. But overall, I do think the fact that we've now got options on the bench is of course good to see, and I do think the fact that Max Meyer and Michy Batshuayi came on and made such an impact is of course good to see, and the fact that we've got that pace and that physicality of Sacco now, who's obviously re-signed, the fact that we've got someone like him to bring off the bench now just to see out the game, and the fact that he's got that powerful left foot to put balls into the box is of course good to see. So now I'm going to move on and just give you a sort of small summary of the game, and of course I've gone into quite a lot of detail about individual players, but in terms of just a small summary of the game, obviously we kept a clean sheet, so of course you've got to look at the back four and say they were pretty solid, and aside from obviously Patrick Villana, who had a slightly off game, on the whole I think the back four were pretty solid, so of course that's something to pick out. But of course there were a few players below par, you've got to look at James McArthur and Patrick Villana in particular, and of course they obviously individually didn't have their best game, but the fact that they still as a team we put in a good performance, and we didn't didn't necessarily let two players in particular who weren't at their best, weren't the worst, but weren't at their best. The fact that we were still able to overcome that, and actually in terms of a team performance we were able to put in a good team performance, was of course good to see. And in terms of the first half, I think it was quite lacklustre from both sides. I do think that other than a few crosses that they put into the box which Mitrovic headed wide, aside from that there weren't really too many chances for Fulham, and obviously we went 1-0 ahead, and that was obviously great to see. But other than that, we weren't really as good in that first half as we were in the second half, because second half we were by far the better team. So of course the first half from both sets of teams was obviously quite lacklustre, but nevertheless we've seen too many times this season where we've played well and haven't got anything, so it's nice to see us in that first half not particularly play well but still get the lead and still go ahead. But like I've said already, the fact that things still picked up in the second half is of course a positive we can take from that. Now of course you could argue the penalty was quite soft, but I do think there's no debate from anyone, it's very stupid for Fulham to give away. Obviously Benteke was trying to go up for the ball, and obviously Christie, I believe his name is, obviously put his hand out. No debate about that, very clear for the referee to see. But you could say that if we've been given that against us, we'd be quite annoyed in the fact that, you know, they're both going up for the ball in the hands there. But I do think if that was given against us, I would say it's a penalty, because it's a stupid thing for the defenders to do. As we saw in the Spurs game in the FA Cup, you know, defenders shouldn't put their hands there because it's only going to cause trouble. And of course, luckily for us, we were obviously on the good end of that. Now, in terms of Benteke and Ayew, I think they worked tirelessly up top, and once again, they were both putting themselves about a bit. So it was nice to see not only were we defensively solid, but actually going forward, we obviously were very good as well. And the fact that even though Andros Townsend didn't quite manage to get on the ball enough, particularly in that first half, maybe he was just having one of those games. But like I've said, going back to that cross he put in for Benteke, it just goes to show that even if you're a player having an off game, the fact that Townsend still was able to put in a few good deliveries, a few decent ones into the box, was of course good to see. Now, in terms of our new signing, Batshuayi, he obviously has clearly has an eye for goal. He came on and straight away we saw his quality and we saw the threat he had. So the fact that he made such a telling impact, and we could see such a telling influence on the game from so early on, is of course goes to show the quality he's got. And obviously that's obvious, because if you look at his goal scoring record wherever he's been, he's obviously scored quite a lot of goals. But the fact that his sort of 10-minute cameo on the pitch still went on to produce the goal, which of course made it 2-0, was of course, which makes it even better, because even if Batshuayi hadn't got the assist, I'm going to call it an assist, even if he hadn't have got that, we'll be looking at him going, he's very decent, looking to get on the ball, looking to have shots away on the box. But the fact that he topped off what was a good sort of short cameo for him, which hopefully shows us what's to come from him, the fact that he combined that with actually causing the goalkeeper to make a save after he got past not one, not two, but three Fulham defenders. The fact that he got past them, made the shot and caused the goalkeeper into that mistake in terms of parrying the ball to Schlupp is of course to see, because Schlupp in particular, apart from the goal, he maybe could have been better on the ball, but I do think his midfield performance, aside from the fact that he gave away possession, Schlupp's midfield performance was very good. So as much as Batshuayi, in terms of his influence, you could argue he deserved that goal in terms of that ability to get past three players. But then on the other hand, Jeffrey Schlupp had worked so hard throughout the game in midfield, and of course he got a goal to obviously show for it. Now, in terms of for all the possession that's Fulham had, I think they had like 60% possession. Once again, we just sat deep, we defended well, and of course, even though Fulham had that possession, we basically dominated the shots on both normal shots and shots on target, and of course the corner count as well. And I don't even think Fulham had a single corner in the game. Obviously, correct me if I'm wrong. So the fact that we had someone, or we played against a Fulham side who had loads of the ball, but we were still able to dominate shots and obviously have more corners as well, just goes to show that even though Fulham have that quality in midfield, they haven't quite got that telling final ball. So the fact that we dominated that part of the game in particular in terms of shots, and particularly shots on target, was of course good to see. Now, of course, we've got a really big, I suppose it makes a change. Obviously, we've got a big game coming up against West Ham, but it makes a change to actually come away from a game at Selhurst this season. Obviously, we've had good wins against, you're looking at Burnley, you're looking at Leicester. We've had good wins there, but it was nice to see us actually come away with a league win, because of course it's been quite difficult for us to score at home this season. Obviously nice for us to score 2 goals, but also to actually come away with a good performance, because too many times this season we've come to Selhurst, or we've come to any ground really, and we've played well but haven't got anything we deserved. So it's actually nice to see us obviously put in a good performance, but finally get what we deserved from that performance, which of course was the clean sheet and the 2 goals to go with that. Now, of course, from this game, it was obviously a great win, but we now need to take that momentum and actually use it for the West Ham game next week, because of course West Ham play on Monday night as I'm recording the podcast, obviously playing against Liverpool, so they're going to have 2 days less rest than us, which really for professional footballers isn't going to make too much difference. But nevertheless, we've got to use that momentum, use that positive energy from that win against Fulham to actually take it into that game, because if we win that game, of course we could go above Brighton if they lose, and of course in terms of West Ham we'll go 1 point within them. So of course a very important, crucial game coming up at the weekend. So I'm now going to move on to my Man of the Match award, but before I do that and give you my Man of the Match and who I thought the biggest influence in the game, I'm now going to give you the 4 nominations I put forward for the award. Now obviously, when you consider, or when you compare this game against Fulham at the weekend to our game against Southampton in the week, obviously there was quite a vast amount of difference in our performance, in the fact that it was quite difficult to pick a Man of the Match for that game against Southampton, because obviously it was quite a disappointing result, albeit we'll take the point. And obviously the game against Fulham is the complete sort of opposite, the complete juxtaposition in the fact that it was such a good performance, and obviously players across the team obviously do deserve credit. So actually, looking at the man of the match, it was quite difficult to pick 4 players to obviously sum it up, mainly because of how good our performance was. But I've managed to narrow it down to 4 players. Obviously, for me personally, I think it reflects, our game as a whole. We've got 2 defensive players, 2 offensive players, and I do think, both our defensive and offensive work was good in this game. So I do think picking 2 players from each area of our play is obviously fair enough. And there are obviously going to be people who disagree with the players I've put forth, and of course comment below if you do feel that way. But I do think the players I've got, do give a fair reflection of the game. So the players I've gone with Aaron Wan-Bissaka, Mamadou Sakho, Christian Benteke, and Jordan Ayew. Now in terms of Wan-Bissaka's performance, obviously this guy never really fails to impress me, but one of the reasons for me, it's just because of how well he dealt with Ryan Babel in particular. Now, of course, he's experienced, and you could say Wan-Bissaka's inexperienced, albeit he doesn't really show it. But of course, that's going to be a great battle. So the fact that Wan-Bissaka came up on the good end of that battle by actually getting the better of Ryan Babel was of course good to see. And when you consider he's been quite good for Fulham recently, that's obviously something that's quite impressive. And like he always does, Wan-Bissaka barely puts a foot wrong. And I think there was a stat after the game that he attempted 7 tackles and completed 7 tackles. So the fact that he's got a 100% success rate in a statistic like that for your defensive work is something that's really impressive. So for that alone, he obviously deserves to be on the shortlist. But like he's been doing recently, the fact that he was making a number of important tackles and blocks, and certainly quite early on in the game where we were obviously trying to get that first goal whilst remaining solid, that was of course really important to see. Now when you consider Fulham were concentrating a lot of their attacks down the left hand side, obviously Wan-Bissaka had to be on his A game, and when you consider not much was successful down that left hand side, despite Fulham putting everything they could down that left hand side, really just goes to show how well Wan-Bissaka did in the fact that he was able to deal with that and obviously come up on the other end of that. Now my final point really about him, and this is something which you don't normally expect from your fullbacks. You obviously expect them to occasionally do this, but the fact that on a number of occasions Wan-Bissaka actually drifted wide and played a little bit more narrow than you normally would do, just to help out Tompkins deal with Mitrovic, is just another thing that really did impress me. Now of course I could talk all day about his sliding challenges, blocks, and certainly that's something that's always impressed me, but the thing about this was just not necessarily the game management, I suppose that's not the right word to use, but the fact that he was able to be aware of what was happening, and the fact that that meant that he was able to identify when he had to drift inside and obviously help his fellow centre-backs by obviously defending against someone like Mitrovic, is obviously goes to show how good his defensive work is, but also his footballing intelligence is good in that instance, in the fact that he's able to identify that obviously Tompkins in particular needed help. So the fact that he combined his good defending against Ryan Babel with the fact that he was able to deal with everything, or almost everything, that Fulham threw down the left hand side, whilst the fact that he does what he normally does by making tackles and blocks, is obviously why I've put him on the shortlist. Now in terms of Mamadou Sakho, I could have put a number of players in that sort of position, James Tompkins, Luka Milivojevic, there were a number of players who I could obviously put in the man of the match shortlist, but I've gone with Mamadou Sakho just for the sheer fact that he was just an absolute rock at the back, and it was just yet another solid performance from him, making blocks, making challenges, basically stopping everything Fulham threw at them, whilst also actually just dealing with Mitrovic really well, is obviously something that really impressed me. Now obviously we've seen, certainly this season, the fact that Sakho is very good at playing the ball out from the back and is very good at moving us forward, and he's done exactly that for our second goal. So whilst we could talk about, Andros Townsend, Max Meyer, Michy Batshuayi and Jeffrey Schlupp in terms of that goal, it all came from, and it all stemmed from Mamadou Sakho making a double challenge. Obviously Fulham were on the counter-attack, Sakho goes down, makes a fantastic challenge, then the ball goes away and he makes yet another challenge and obviously pings the ball forward, and then we go on to score. So not only was he solid defensively, but actually going forward, in the fact that he was determined and he won both them challenges to flick the ball forward, is something that was really impressive for me. So not only defensively was he absolutely solid, but in terms of timing the challenges to get the ball forward, he was obviously excellent in that department as well. Now my third player is Christian Benteke. Now of course he's been out for a while, but actually I was really impressed with his performance, and certainly it didn't look like he's been injured since September, so he's been injured for quite a long period of time. Now something I was really impressed with is just the sheer amount of aerial duels that he won in this game. Now, of course, we'd expect him to win them because of his physicality, but there's some of them some of the ones that he did win, you wouldn't expect him to win it, and that's why I've put him on the shortlist, because quite a number of the balls we put forward, you'll just expect them to be quite easy for Fulham to deal with, and obviously they could head them clear. So the fact that Benteke, even though he's been out for as long as he has been, the fact that he was able to deal with them so well is something that impressed me, and certainly that's why I've put him on the shortlist. But also just the fact that him coming back into attack just gave us that sheer presence up top, which we've been missing in recent games, and the fact that he obviously played his part to win the penalty by obviously basically being too strong for Christie, obviously forcing Cyrus Christie to make that mistake with the handball, because obviously he was trying to get the ball away from Benteke, who of course was going to get on the end of it. As in doing so, he's obviously handballed it. So even though he wasn't directly involved in that penalty, the fact that he was the guy who forced Christie into the mistake is of course something impressive as well. And then when you consider, just to add on that, is that yes, he didn't have any clear goal scoring opportunities, but the fact that he tried to score a bicycle kick, which obviously he connected with Townsend's cross, and it went, and you know, the cross and the ball came off the crossbar, really just goes to show he seems to be back to himself. He seems to have confidence, and obviously it was nice to see him actually attempt something like that, because we've seen him score one before. Obviously he didn't score on this occasion, but the fact that he attempted it, and he was so unlucky that if it had been a few inches lower, it would have come in off the crossbar, as opposed to, you know, deflect off the crossbar. It obviously just goes to show, you know, the fine margins in football. But obviously it was nice to see him actually try and do something like that in the first place. Now my final point really is just the fact that even though he's been injured, and even though Roy Hodgson came out after the game and basically said that, you know, the sports science people have said that, you know, they wouldn't expect him to be on the pitch for more than 45 minutes. The fact that he played 60 minutes in the game, and in that second half, the fact that he just continued to trouble Fulham, even after the break, when you can understand he might be a bit fatigued, having not played, you know, that long since September essentially. So the fact that he was able to continue with the good work up front that he was doing in the first half is something that really did impress me. And yes, he came off, and obviously some people were saying he was our best player, why did we take him off? But I obviously understand it, you know, he was a bit fatigued, and we obviously don't want to risk him getting another injury. So of course, the fact that he was still able to continue that, considering he's been out for so long, was of course something impressive, and something that's quite worthy of putting him up for the man of the match. Now in terms of my final player, Jordan Ayew, obviously the last few weeks or so he's basically been a workhorse up top, you know, working really hard, and he done exactly that in this game. But what he's been missing in recent games in terms of having chances for own goal, he basically made up for it in this game. So the fact that he was able to combine, you know, the fact that he works hard up top by putting pressure on the defence, the fact that he now combined that with the fact that he first forced Sergio Rico to make a number of saves. You know, early in the second half, he's got into the box on a few occasions, you know, tried to rifle one top corner, and Rico's made a save. So the fact that he was working hard by putting pressure on the back four, chasing balls down, using hold-up play, link-up play. So the fact that he was able to combine that with a few, you know, decent chances that actually really challenged Rico was of course good to see. And I do think actually as a partnership, albeit with Batshuayi coming in now, we're probably not going to see it, but I do think, you know, Benteke playing up top with Jordan Ayew playing off him seemed to work really well. But I do think maybe to bring it to even better level, maybe someone like Benteke or Batshuayi, or even Batshuayi and Jordan Ayew playing off each other, whichever the way is, I think that could be a good way going forward, because I do think certainly Benteke and Ayew seem to work well, and obviously when Batshuayi came on, he impressed as well. So maybe there's some sort of potential there with the competition in the attacking places that actually we could have quite a potent attack going forward. Now, like I've said already, you know, I could give the award to any of these four players, you know, Wan-Bissaka and Wan-Bissaka for both the defensive work, and obviously Benteke and Ayew for their offensive work up top. But for me personally, you know, when you consider as a defender you have an 100% success rate for your challenges, I don't really think you can look past someone like that for the Man of the Match award. So congratulations, Aaron Wan-Bissaka, you know, you win this week's Man of the Match award, and obviously you don't get a trophy or certificate, but you do get my sincere congratulations on what was yet another solid performance from you. But, you know, I could obviously give it to any players in the team really, because aside from these four players, I think as a whole team we had a really good performance. But for me, the thing that made Wan-Bissaka the thing that made me pick him above the other players is just the sheer fact that he had that 100% success rate in tackling. And that's essentially it, because if it weren't for his challenges and his tackles, maybe Fulham would have put a few more crosses into the box and maybe Mitrovic would have scored. So the fact that he was able to perform so well, like he always does, was obviously the thing that really did impress me. But of course, notable mentions do go to the whole team, because I do think as a whole, the starting 11 played well, and obviously the players coming off the bench also played well. But obviously, very notable mentions to, of course, Sako, Benteke and Ayew, who of course made it onto my shortlist. So now you've heard my match report, player rankings and my man of the match. That concludes the podcast. Now I've got interviews with Roy Hodgson, Jeffrey Schlupp, Michy Batshuayi and Christian Benteke following the game.
Jeff, another goal for you. You could be on for top scorer this season, huh?
Yeah. Obviously goals are important, and I went into this season wanting to score more, and I managed to get another one, but obviously the 3 points were more important today, and I'm happy to have won the game today. Yeah,
what kind of a game was it for you up there? It looked like it was quite a lot of hard work.
Yeah, it was definitely. I mean, they came, they actually played quite well, and we knew they would be passing the ball the way they did, and obviously we stuck to our plans, and we managed to get the first one for a penalty, and then obviously the second one killed the game off.
Yeah, managed to restrict them to no shots on target, even though they had more possession. How well does this Palace team, defend as a team?
Yeah. One of the main things we work on is obviously our shape to stop other teams getting chances, and obviously it's nice to have gotten another clean sheet, and it's obviously nice to see the rewards of working on our shape and everyone sticking to their task.
You seem to be the guy that the manager often turns to during a game. Do you feel like you're doing enough now to warrant maybe starting regularly?
Yeah, I mean, I'm always ready when called upon, and obviously managed to find myself in the team, and I just want to do as best as I can for the team, and obviously I want to start games, but the manager's got a job to do. He's got to pick 11 players, and that's for him to decide. But I've always been ready. I'm ready, and obviously when I'm called upon, I'll straight in there and go and do what I do.
And finally, just back to the goal, it was from a shot from Michy Batshuayi. You looking forward to playing with him?
Yeah. Obviously, everyone knows about his quality. He's played for big clubs, and it's a great signing, obviously. And he came on for 10-15 minutes, and you saw glimpses of what he's gonna add to the team, and I think he'll gel really well and do really well for us.
Michy, first of all, how important a victory was that for Crystal Palace today?
Yes, it's very important. It's good for the team, of course, for me too.
Welcome back to the Premier League. How do you feel to be back here?
I feel good, but I need to training with the team, so to have the
to know each other.
Yes, so something, but it's good. It's a good start.
Can you tell me what the last few days have been like for you? Because you were in Spain. When did you meet your teammates for the first time?
Today. Today with the team, yes, but one day before training, so a little bit run, and with the coach.
Is Crystal Palace a good football club for you to be at, and what can you bring to the team?
Yeah, so dis que je veux essayer de rapporter le plus possible pour faire gagner l'équipe, pour aider.
He's going to bring as much as he can to help the team to win and get some game times to do his best like he always did.
Michy, I wish you all the best for the future. Bakary, thanks for helping out as well.
Thank you.
Thanks, guys.
Christian, 2-0 win today. It must have been great for you to be back out there.
Yeah, I'm so happy to be back, and I worked so hard to be back at Cyrus, and I'm really pleased with the 3 points.
And 70 minutes as well. How are you feeling?
Yeah, I feel good. I felt good during the game, sharp, strong, and I was just anxious about my body, because obviously I didn't play for a long time, so I just wanted to stay fit, and that's what I've done. So I'm really pleased.
The first goal penalty came from a handball jostling with you in the area. It just shows that if you get the ball up to you in the area, you can cause problems.
Yeah, I think that's why when we play two up front with Jordan, we really work hard to help our midfielder, and I think we control the game, and we deserve those 3 points.
And Jeff Schlupp with the goal. He's scoring quite a few this season, isn't he?
Yeah, I told him he was lucky because of our work, and he got more space at the end. So now I'm pleased with for Jeff.
And how great is it to have your mate Michy here now?
Yeah, Michy, it's a good friend. We used to stay together when we are in Belgium. The good thing is now it's another striker, so now it's gonna be competition. But it's good because we're gonna work hard. Not only myself, but Jordan, Connor, and Michy as well. So it's gonna be a great competition.
And finally, just something totally different. The changing room. I've heard dancing in the ceiling. Lionel Richie plays so far. You can call me out. We can hear. Got my mind set on you. Who's in charge of the music tonight? Normally it's Grime.
I know that before the game it was Baki. Obviously he's back, so his playlist is back as well. But after the game, I'm not sure.
First half, I've got to give Fulham a lot of credit. I thought that their passing and ability to keep the ball and ask questions of us was very good. We were fortunate to get the goal, I think, because it's one of those. It was a clear penalty. I don't think there's any question about that. But it's one of those very strange penalties where you can't quite understand what's gone through the defender's head by lifting his hand to the ball. So that was a break for us, which we took advantage of. But second half, I thought we actually had quite a lot of control in the game, and we had a lot of opportunities in and around their box, and we weren't anywhere near under the sort of pressure we were at times in the first half. But we're in anxious times. That's the problem. I think that I always get the feeling that if we'd have had a few more points that perhaps we'd deserved in some of these earlier games, things would be a lot less anxious, a lot less problematic. But the problem is for us, like so many teams around us, the points are so valuable that when you've got them, i.e. you're in the lead, there's a risk that you're going to stop playing and you're going to think more about the final whistle. And I don't know what as a manager you do about that. I don't think any manager's able to give me advice on that one either.
And yet, in the second half, despite that anxiety, you never looked anything other than in control.
No, second half was good. I mean, we had some good opportunities from the corner kicks, and I think we're looking more and more dangerous from corner kicks. And there were a lot of positives for us. It was positive to bring Michy Batshuayi on and to see him do so well to set up the second goal with his strike. And it was great to bring Batshuayi back on, and great also to bring Max Meyer, who's not been in for a while, back on. So I think we're going to need those players in these games coming up, and it's nice that they came on today and played an important part in our victory.
Michy Batshuayi showed his quality, as you said. We also saw Christian Benteke with a real moment of quality in the first half. He will get a goal again, won't he?
Oh, without a shadow of a doubt. I mean, Christian, at the moment, we have to be careful with. I mean, at half-time, he was cramping up slightly. So the medical people told me to keep a close eye on him because they didn't think that he'd be able to really maintain the level of running that we require without maybe doing some damage, because cramping up's the first step towards getting a muscle strain. So we thought if we could get another 15 minutes or so out of him, because we got alternatives on the bench, we actually got 20, 22, 23 minutes out of him, so that was good. The fans don't understand when he comes off. They think he's being substituted because he's not played well. That was never the case. It was more a question of, can he play that amount of time? But we've now got another week's work, another week of training. By next Saturday, he'll be fitter, and hopefully, we'll be able to use him a bit more.
Was there a concern about James Tomkins too? It looked like you might have to take him off at one stage.
Yeah, he got a very nasty blow, didn't he? But the thing about I thought the back four was excellent. I thought, in particular, Tomkins and Mamadou Sakho and Aaron Bissaka, they played out of their skin, really, especially in the first half when we were under a bit of pressure. But the thing is that James Tomkins had a slight muscle problem after the Southampton game. It was touch and go whether he'd play. And Mama was sick on Thursday and couldn't train on Friday, so he returned from sickness. So for me, those two were heroic today in the way they played, and we needed them because they have been a key part of our defensive strategy this year, and that's 12 matches now that we keep a clean sheet, and they've been largely responsible for helping the goalkeepers out in that area.
2-0 Tottenham, 2-0 Fulham. Home confidence, home momentum?
Well, maybe, Guy. One hopes so. I mean, I'm still smouldering a little bit about Wednesday evening when I thought we actually didn't take care of the 3 points there that we could so easily have had, and surrendered 2 of them. But another good thing today is I've stood in front of TV cameras so many times here and had to answer questions. How come you can never win a game without Wilfried Zaha? And then we did win a game eventually without him after he got suspended for 5 yellow cards when he had to miss a game against Leicester, and we won it. And we've done it again today. So I don't think I'm going to get too many people pointing that out to me. So I'll take the initiative and point it out that we are not a one-man team and we can win matches without Wilfried Zaha.
So there you have it. Now you've heard what Roy Hodgson, Jeffrey Schlupp, Michy Batshuayi and Christian Benteke had to say after the game. That concludes this week's podcast for the game against Fulham. But make sure to come back next week for my post-match review of the game against West Ham. So thanks for listening and remember to up the Palace.